Season 2 of House of the Dragon. It's over. That's it. Now we have to wait at least 2 years for season 3. Before I talk about the season finale and the whole of season 2, yes, I will be covering Rings of Power. That will be happening, so you can stop asking me. I promise I will cover Rings of Power. But we're here to talk about House of the Dragon. So I want to talk about the season finale, pros, cons, overview, themes, my usual jam that I didn't do for a couple episodes. Sorry, oops, life got in the way, I'm sorry. And then I want to talk about the whole of season 2, pros, cons, what I got right, what I got wrong, favorite bits, and then kind of looking forward to season 3, what I hope for, what I expect, etc. Let's get into it. Season finale, overall, excellent. Very excellent. I heard some chatter that people were disappointed in the finale because it wasn't like explosive enough. You know, last season ended with Lucerys dying in a violent, explosive, fire-breathing way. It was a quite dramatic way to end season 1. We didn't do that season 2. And I mean, I guess I get why that would be disappointing if you were expecting and hoping for something big and bombastic, but I did not personally feel disappointed by the season finale, or at least not in that way. There were things that I didn't like, but I wasn't disappointed because it wasn't like explosive and fiery and big enough. Like, there was another episode, I think it was episode 5 or something, where I was like, people are calling this filler, like, what? No. And actually, like, I do want to talk about the filler problem in this season, because I do think there is a filler problem, but, like, not in the way, not for the reasons that people were saying that I saw. So anyway, overall excellent finale. Was not dull. I think a very metaphorically explosive way to end the season. I think it really hit on some major themes, kind of, that it had been building and had been developing over the course of season 2, and it really kind of hammered home some of those themes. Those themes being legacy, the power of perception and the perception of power, history, the gaze of history, and the question of who pays the price. I think these 4 themes kind of define really the story of House of the Dragon and of the dance of the dragons and this kind of period of Targaryen history, but particularly season 2 was concerning itself with those questions. So legacy, you know, there's constantly these questions of like, who's going to inherit your power, inherit your seat, inherit your name, inherit your story. We have the questions of bastardy and of legitimacy. We have questions of who, forgetting birthright, but who has the moral right to take on the mantle of someone else, who has the duty to take on the mantle of someone else. So the idea of royalty being a great boon and also a great burden, power being a great boon and a great burden, legacy being a great boon and a great burden. And that sort of ties into the power of perception and perception of power, meaning that like there's great power in the way that you are perceived. There's sort of an Ouroboros or a feedback loop where if people perceive you to have power, that gives you real power, and having real power feeds into the perception that you have it because the exercise of that power feeds into the perception. And again, it just kind of goes back and forth and in a circle. So the whole, we, the Targaryens, have the right to be the rulers, we have dragons. Like they have the genuine actual power of the dragons, which is real power, and therefore there's the perception of them having that power. But we have, again, coming into question this whole thing of like bastards riding dragons. Does that mean that dragons are powerful and they are a genuine, like, concrete power? But Targaryens have had power in a less direct way. It's their indirect link to dragons. And so if anyone can ride a dragon, then the perception of Targaryen power now is diminished. The dragon's real power remains. But the trappings of state, the trappings of royalty, the trappings of birthright, etc., these don't disappear. So this is the big conversation with the Jace, who's very upset about this whole, you know, he's a bastard, everyone knows he's a bastard, and the only thing he has is the dragons, and if anyone can ride a dragon, then what does he actually have? And we have this great conversation between him and Baela where she's like, well, look, people are going to perceive you the way that you allow them to perceive you. And if you are going to insist that the only thing that sets you apart is the dragons, then that will be the only thing that sets you apart. Again, power is perception and the perception of power. And this again ties into history. Again, the constant question of like, how will history remember this? How will history look upon this? What is the legacy? The Song of Ice and Fire, which I'll talk about in a bit. But who has the right to continue the line, who has the responsibility to continue the line. Over and over, we have this whole, like, in the moment, there's the narrative, the political story, the rumors, the perception of the people, but that also then leads to like the overall memory of these events, which is more clearly spoken in this final episode. So we had the narrative of Rhaenyra the Cruel, because of the blood and cheese incident, and that we have the reputations of many characters coming into play, kind of defining what their options are at all because of what is expected of them and what has become the narrative surrounding them. And then here, and again, I'll talk about the scene more specifically, but when Rhaenyra and Alicent meet for the second time, and Rhaenyra actually gives voice to the history will remember you as the villain, which this show has in general been kind of in conversation, not just with how history remembers events, but very specifically the book that this is based on is the history that is remembering these events. And so more so than any other adaptation, any adaptation of a book is going to probably mess with things, change things, cut things out, add things in, etc. But with House of the Dragon and with Fire and Blood in particular, because Fire and Blood is a history book, and because this is about watching the events of history unfold, whereas Fire and Blood is how does history remember this, then any change to the narrative now is not just, oh, they changed it for the adaptation, which some of it really is just that, but it's always kind of an added layer to this, the question of, is this, oh, adaptation changed it, they changed it for the show, etc., or is it, are we saying that this is what really happened, but that history did not remember it that way? Because so often in the real world, the way things actually went down, the real things that happened, the real conversations that happened, the real people behind those stories, those kind of get forgotten and get lost in the story of history that is told. And so the changes that are made in this show have to be always in conversation with and aware of the fact that they are in some sense making that point at all times. Anytime they diverge from the book, they're basically making a case for, this is history, the book is how we remember that history, and those are not always the same. And then the theme of who pays the price. Over and over again, it's been drilled into us about how the small folk pay the price, but we also and again, I'll talk about this in more detail because I have problems with it, but with Daemon, we had the sort of the other side of it, of the decision makers and of the people who hold power, about what a huge burden that is in actual fact, how the people that want it or the people that don't have it think of it as a privilege and only as a privilege, but the people that labor under the weight of that immense responsibility, Rhaenyra and her father before her, Viserys and Alicent, are cracking under that burden and they do not want it, and they are having to sacrifice their lives in a different way for these struggles, for these decisions, for these power plays. And so who's the real winner here at all? It seems like everyone's the worse off for what's going on. And that's also kind of the point of the show as well. The way that in a civil war, there are no winners, there are only losers. Okay, so let's talk about some criticisms. I've been very, very positive about the show overall, and I still very much am. It's A+ television. But there were some things that I did not like in this episode, and also things that this episode kind of like there are things that weren't only a problem with this episode. It's sort of this episode put the period on some things that I was like, okay, well, if that's how that's gonna go, I'm not actually a big fan of it. So I have been a staunch defender of the inclusion of A Song of Ice and Fire, of the Song of Ice and Fire being this kind of like in the background, like passed from royal to royal, tying it into the books, the Song of Ice and Fire books. Like, I in general have really enjoyed this inclusion and enjoyed what they have done with it and how they've played with it, and where I kind of see them using it not to justify things, but to add complexity oftentimes in situations, and to add another add another way through which to view these events and the motivations for them. But that being said, I did not like Daemon's vision at the end of, or not the end of, but in the season finale, where Daemon is kind of clued into the Song of Ice and Fire in a way that even Rhaenyra and Viserys were not. He kind of gets the full vision that Aegon the Conqueror perhaps received, or something akin to it. He gets to see White Walkers and Daenerys Targaryen, and he basically looks into Galadriel's mirror pool and is like, I've seen things that may yet come to pass. And I don't like this for a few reasons. First, for the purposes of this show, because Aegon the Conqueror, whose vision this originally was, is not around, and so the way that the Song of Ice and Fire comes into play is only through legacy and story, word of mouth, and belief. It's just been kind of, this belief that Viserys holds and passes on to Rhaenyra. It hasn't actually been magical beyond, like, their belief in something magical, or their belief in something higher than, or greater than, or different from the natural world having affected Aegon the Conqueror, that he was keyed into something beyond. But because, like, the show hasn't, like, validated that beyond the fact that we know the events of A Song of Ice and Fire, really could just be a good guess, right? You know, its legacy is important to any ruling family, and they'll always invent a narrative to justify it. For dragon riders who wield fire, to be faced with the uppermost north, which is notoriously cold and extremely long winters. Like, it's not crazy to think that somebody would have a weird dream or a weird idea of, like, some kind of a destiny to do with ice and fire. Like, you don't have to be a genuine, like, soothsaying wizard fortune teller to, like, have come up with something like that. So again, the way that it played out in the show was mostly Viserys fervently believing this and passing along this belief to Rhaenyra. And so the import of it in the story isn't as like an actual magical influence. The only import of it is what our characters believe about it. If they think there's something to it, and that then governs their actions. And so because I'm much more interested in character work and in how people behave and character motivations and this sort of thing, then as it affects the characters, which is how it has been in the show so far, it has just been that. A source of motivation for the characters, a source of tension for the characters, a source of confusion for the characters. Viserys' dying words being to do with this. Again, it wasn't to do with actually looking into the future. It wasn't to do with actually doing magic. It wasn't saying that you genuinely have this destiny, you're the chosen one. It's these people believing they have a destiny, believing they are the chosen ones. As history has often had people believing that of themselves, you know, manifest destiny and this sort of thing. And as that kind of a factor in the story, I enjoy it very much. But Daemon, with his visions all season long, and then getting this actual vision of the Song of Ice and Fire, and then that being the thing that makes him decide, I would have preferred him to be convinced of the Song of Ice and Fire more in the way that Rhaenyra was. Believing that this is true, not being literally shown, like, arguably concrete proof that it is. And for Daemon to decide that he is just a player on the board and not, you know, the main character. For this to happen kind of through magical means rather than trauma or introspection or experience or real conversations. It's kind of like through woo-woo magic stuff. Like that, I've seen worse. It's still very good character work, generally speaking, but that bothers me much more than when people are like, oh, they're just doing it to tie it into the other books. Like, that doesn't bother me. So long as in the story, it's not presented as like, you're concretely the chosen one, here's an actual vision to prove it. You know what I mean? So that was kind of a step too far for me. And it's not even like, I don't mind like the three-eyed raven and Bran and the tying in the old gods and the trees, etc. Like, even with Bran, it always kind of still seemed extremely murky. And Bran is definitely the outlier in terms of, like, even having access to that, just like Helena. So, I don't know, it just seemed too on the nose. And I didn't like that. And it also seemed like the culmination of a ton of nothing for Daemon, which is one of my cons for the season overall. So we'll come back to that. Another messed up, in my opinion, that was kind of season long and then kind of culminated in the season finale was Alan, Corlys Velarion's bastard son. We were like treading water with that plot line, if it can be called that, all season long, where we kept circling back to him just looking miserable and ornery, and that like we weren't doing anything with that, and I kept waiting for us to do something with that because we kept coming back to it and really drawing attention to it. I mean, he's in the book, but like, we don't have all that. So I was like, what are we doing with him? Like, why do we keep coming back to this? And for it to culminate in him kind of chewing out Corlys for like not doing right by him in a world where bastards like are not really like raised up or treated well. It's not you can be pissed about it, but it's not really like an expectation that you can reasonably have in this world. And again, you can be bitter about your lot in life, but the way he straight up chews out Corlys Velaryon for just not being any worse than any other, like, highborn lord, and not just highborn lord, I mean, like, he's, like, part of the royal family. I just, like, I'm not saying that it's right to treat your bastard son this way, but the reaction is just so, like, disproportionate to the type of world that they are in. Like, it seems anachronistic, which doesn't seem like the right word because it's the fantasy world, but it's reminiscent to me of how I feel when I, like, read books and watch shows where, like, I'm thinking of like when a female character is like, you don't think women are equal? Like, this is so shocking and abhorrent to me. And it's like, I'm sorry, are you not from the era that this is taking place in? How can you be surprised that people think women are lesser? Like, that's just like common. Like, you can be annoyed about it, but you can't possibly be surprised by it because it's just like the norm. Like, it's like the exception for someone to think a woman is not lesser. So, you know, it's like this like very modern reaction of like, how dare you think that? So, like, Corlys' son, his bastard son, being like, how dare you treat me this way when I'm your flesh and blood, in a world where like legitimacy is like taken so very seriously, and like bastards are aplenty and they are not like typically recognized by the families that they are like blood related to, for him to be this bitter and to have this kind of expectation and to like chew out Corliss like this, it just felt so out of place and bizarre. And for that to kind of be the payoff of this like season-long arc of him moping, I don't really know why we did that, or what the point of that was, or why we needed to include that. I don't know what we were doing with that, and it just didn't belong, in my opinion. I kept waiting to find out something where like there's a reason for him to be this bitter. And it's not like, okay, he's obviously his bastard son, like that's pretty clear from go. There's gotta be something more, right? But no, that's it. Just that he's his bastard. And he's like pissed about it. Like, again, I'm not recommending the way that like society is structured in House of the Dragon as like a good way to structure society, but like you can't possibly be surprised by this or think that like you're so much worse off than like literally every other bastard in Westeros. Like, that's just like, that's what it's like to be a bastard. Like, it sucks. But like, who's got it better than you? Like, this is the norm. Like, how are you the surprise? I don't know. I don't understand. So anyway, which brings me to another bastard who's like a problem in a different way. Ulf the White, after he gets his dragon. He's been, again, like, we kept coming back to him all season long, and I kept waiting for them to kind of like do something with him beyond him becoming a dragon rider, which like that's in the book. But I was like, again, they keep showing him in a way that like is like meant to make us maybe suspicious of him. They focus on him unduly, and then to have him sit at Rhaenyra's table and mouth off directly to Jacaerys, like again, it seemed extremely out of place. Like, he gets like that he might a little bit kind of test his limits, but it's just like day one of you like barely escaping being like burned alive, and now him acting like this. I don't find it believable that he would act this way, and I also don't find it believable that Rhaenyra and Jacaerys, etc., would permit it. And they like, I mean, Jacaerys kind of chews him out, which even that like he still acts out after that, which is insane to me. But like, and Rhaenyra like is kind of like, well, now we should behave at table. It's like, no, he's a dragon rider, but you can very much behead him. And like, even though maybe you won't actually do it because you do need a dragon rider, he doesn't know that. And you are clearly willing to burn as many bastards as it takes to find a dragon rider, so you know. Anyway, I found that kind of too extreme. Again, he could slightly more subtly kind of like test his bounds, or if we saw it over a longer period of time, if like we had done the episode where they become dragon riders much earlier in the season, and so over the course of several episodes he keeps pushing and pushing and pushing his boundaries. But for day one, for him to act like that, I mean, I don't know if it's actually day one, but it's like borderline day one. It was just so strange and uncomfortable to watch, and not uncomfortable because I feel like, oh, this is an uncomfortable situation. There's plenty of those in House of the Dragon. It's uncomfortable because I'm just like, this doesn't go. Like, this shouldn't be going like this. Why is this written like this? Why is he being like, why is no one stopping him? Like, off with his head. Like, how is, I don't understand why that was written like that. Maybe season 3 will show me why they had a good reason to do it that way, but right now that was just like, to what end are we doing this? Like, he would already be, even if you did it more subtly, he would already make you go, oh, he's gonna be a tricky one to control. You didn't have to have him like cartoonishly like speak out at table. Like, I don't know, it was just too much. It was too bizarre. But some good stuff. We had lots more fun parallels. I don't know if fun is the word. With Daemon and Aemond both getting visions of the future, both weirdly from Helena, not directly in Daemon's case, but Helena sort of appears as like the vision giver in his vision. And then Daemon, I think if it's not the next scene, it's almost the next scene where he's now hearing about the future from Helena. And the way that Daemon's reaction to receiving news of the future and how like much lesser his place in it is than his ambition and his ego would once have desired, is to accept this and embrace this, and Aemond's reaction is very much obviously not to reject it and to fight it. Aemond has very much been kind of the worst case scenario for Daemon, and continues to be. Rhaenyra and Alicent, as ever, paralleled. You know, Rhaenyra went to see Alicent, now Alicent comes to see Rhaenyra. Both scenes extremely contrived. In a vacuum, if we forget how ridiculous it is that we got to that point, it's a joy to see the two of them performing those characters together. We have, you know, the son for a son, both, you know, regretting what it took to get to where they are. They both carry the burdens of ambition, of legacy, of expectation, and both have done right and wrong on the path, and neither is Lily White. And again, I think because they changed in the show and created a story where these two were friends before they became enemies, I think it does make the Civil War and the whole tragedy of the situation that much more potent. Ties into sort of, you know, the brother fighting against brother, friend turning on friend. It just makes it that much more gut-wrenching to watch because they did not begin as enemies. And then Aegon and Viserys, mostly like a physical parallel. Aegon is looking very Viserys these days. And I just want to say, for my first law peeps who've been trying to tell me that Larys Strong is giving Glocta, I have never thought that, and I still do not think that. You know who's giving Glocta? Aegon. Aegon is giving Glocta. Because you forget, my first law readers, that Glocta was not born crippled, as Larys was. Glocta was a prick like Aegon, a handsome, privileged asshole. And then he had his ass handed to him, and he had to learn how to be something else. And that is the path that Aegon is on right now. And it has been really great seeing that actor shine more this season than in season 1, kind of like show his chops. Then in the kind of miscellaneous category, we've got Kristen Cole and his redemption, I put in quotes, because it's not a redemption. He hasn't done anything to redeem himself, but that kind of, not exactly monologue, but little speech he gives to Alicent's brother, where he's finally confessing his self-awareness and self-loathing, which, again, doesn't really redeem you, but it does at least show that you do know how bad you are and how bad you've been. You're not as self-righteous as you appear to be on the surface. That he very much kind of accepts that, like, he must lie in the bed that he has made for himself. And weirdly, I felt like Kristen was almost summing up the viewer's experience of season 2 when he was talking about kind of like believing in all these ideals and then seeing the reality of dragons on the battlefield and men burning and it really meaning nothing and death being almost a relief. I'm not saying that the audience wishes for death. I just mean the sort of like, we too are on this journey of thinking of kings and queens and who has the right to rule, and we must battle over these noble ideals, and then you see the reality of dragon fire, and you see how uncontrollable, unwieldable, unopposable that is, what a force of nature that is, and to just kind of realize your own smallness and your own mortality and the insanity of going to war with dragons. Again, like, I think they did a very good job of showing the dragons in both seasons, kind of the reality of them, again in quotes because they're not real, but like making them feel massive, making them feel deadly, making them feel like a force of nature that is not entirely controlled. I think they've done that excellently well. And then also, I had no idea that Philosophy Tube landed this gig, so that was a fun little surprise seeing Abigail Thorne. I was like, wait, what? Really? So I don't have anything to say about that beyond me just being like, oh, hey, I didn't know. That's awesome. So that's all I have to say about the season finale. Let's talk about the whole of season 2. Overall, what it did wrong, or at least in my opinion. While season 1 kind of like sped through history at a breakneck pace, season 2 slowed things down. And I would say ultimately, having seen the whole of season 2, it slowed things down too much. It's, again, an excellent season of television, but it was slightly too slow. I think we could have gotten through a little bit more of Targaryen history in season 2. The pendulum swung too far in the other direction now. And this created a filler problem, a stagnation problem, a treading water problem. It felt oftentimes this season that the whole of the season is Rhaenyra pacing around Dragonstone, Alicent pacing around King's Landing, and Daemon pacing around Harrenhal. And that they're each just kind of like pacing, treading water, waiting for like the plot to actually finally start happening as it will in season 3, or for the plot to happen around them outside over there where people are killing and dying, but our main characters are just kind of like sitting in their spots and not moving and not doing too much. I mean, I think this showed most keenly with Daemon, who truly had nothing to do. And I'm not saying he actually legitimately had nothing to do. Like, he did do things. There was some progress made. There were developments in the Daemon area. But mostly it felt like they did not know what to do with Daemon's character this season because there isn't that much for him to do in this part of the history. And if we're going to tell this small a part of the history, then it's just kind of like sitting and waiting for things to start happening again. But we can't just not show his character. One, he's a fan favorite. Two, he's really important in general. And yeah. So we just kind of had him lost in his own head for the whole of season 2 until he receives the vision of ice and fire and is like, Team Rhaenyra full steam ahead. And it's just kind of like, so his arc this season was to spiral until he was like, damn, being king might actually kind of suck. Oh, look, Rhaenyra is the chosen one. Okay, well, good thing I got this army together. Almost didn't there for a second, but we got him in the end. And we're ready to go to war now, which was like, first episode I was sent here to make that happen. And the end of the season, here's that army that I was sent here to get. It's like, wow, okay. I mean, I do like plots to go slowly and to actually show us how we get there and the deals that have to be made, the conversations that have to happen. I don't want us rushing around. I don't want a season 8 problem. But, like, we were just, like, wasting time while we waited for something to happen. And then, again, I have generally defended what they've done with Rhaenyra and Alicent, and generally speaking, I think they've done an excellent job with both characters, but there was a softening problem with both characters. I think there's good and bad, pros and cons to this. In general, my position is that mostly they've just kind of like added layers to the characters, complicated the characters, humanized the characters. But I do think, especially in the finale, I don't know, it clinched it for me more, this like constant like hesitancy of like, oh, but do I really want to spill blood and at what cost? And it's kind of like, especially Rhaenyra being like, I guess if I have to go to war, like to fight for my birthright, but who will pay the price? It'll be the little people. It's like, ma'am, you just like burned 30 people because you were looking for some dragon riders. Like, please do not pretend like you care about spilling blood to get your throne, like, so that was a little hard to swallow. If anything, Alicent softening is a little bit easier to swallow because of just kind of how powerless and how chaotic and how much worse everything is, and then because she gets the revelation from Rhaenyra that she has kind of come around to like, yeah, I don't think Viserys actually wanted Aegon on the throne, and having seen Aegon on the throne, who could possibly want Aegon on the throne? I think there's a very real, like, the kind of 180 of Alicent feels very earned. Rhaenyra still wanting to have her cake and eat it too is getting a little harder to swallow. Like, we're still gonna root for her. We still think she's in the right, kind of. I mean, if Civil War is ever in the right, but like, she was wrongly usurped. She is the rightful heir, and she does seem to be like a better ruler. Like, she would be better for the realms, like Civil War aside. But again, like, this kind of like, oh, I think of the little people, but except for when I don't. I don't know, the hypocrisy of it is a little bit, yeah. And then Helena, again, she's not really my favorite character, never has been. She's not that much in the, I mean, none of them are that much in the book because, again, it's written like a history book. But like Helena, like I talked about this in the episode where she's like directly after Blood and Cheese, where I was like, her performance is not working for me. I appreciated everyone's comments that are like, well, like, this is how you're perceiving her. And like, I respect that you're perceiving her that way and that it did work for you. But even like after hearing that and like looking back at her performance, like, it still does not work for me. It does not read to me that way. It reads as cold and lacking in feeling. And again, like by the end of this season, I mean, like, in the book, her arc, like her presence in the book is to simply have like utterly lost it, to be just like completely like gone over the grief and horror and trauma of Blood and Cheese. And she was not that traumatized even from like immediately after, and she certainly by the end of season 2, she seems like fine. Like, she, like, does not give a fuck about anything. She's just, like, Luna Lovegooding her way through the Dance of the Dragons. And I just, like, her arc in the book, like, the one thing you know about Helena is that she has completely lost it over grief and trauma. And Helena in the show, the one thing you know about her is that, like, well, she didn't have all her marbles to begin with, but, like, however many marbles she had at the start, she still has them. She's just kind of, like, plugging along. And this also then bothers me because, like, again, I think it was I very much liked how they set up this situation where Blood and Cheese, because Alicent was in bed with Chris and Cole and Helena walked in on them, the fact that this creates the situation where they are kind of indirectly culpable or responsible, and now there's the added guilt of like, okay, we shouldn't have been in bed at all, but then also being in bed might have like contributed to Blood and Cheese happening. Like, now we have to feel guilty over that, and Helena knows it. Is she going to be mad? Is she going to be sad? Like, Helena's nothing about it because she's nothing about any of it. And so this like layered complex situation where like I thought we were building to all of this rich drama between Alicent and Helena, and adding to the trauma of I was expecting her to be like traumatized by the events of it and traumatized by how much she like hates her mother because she blames her but then knows she really shouldn't blame her, or this kind of a thing. And we just like didn't do any of that because Helena is just like nothing, nobody's home, doesn't care. Like once in a while she's just kind of like, oh, it makes me sad, death, I don't want to kill people. It's like, okay, whatever, get it together, girl. But yeah, I think it did, for all that, it did a lot of things right. Despite the filler, I think that in general the show was paced very well. So if we're doing this treading water, like I think it did a very good job of kind of almost tricking you into thinking that we are not treading water. It, like, the episodes still felt kind of like crammed with information and history and plot, even though, again, like when you'd actually think about how much had happened, you're like, actually we were a little bit just kind of like in a holding pattern here. But you did such a good job of showing the richness of like these character situations, these political situations, the complexity of the situation that Westeros is in, that it never felt boring. It was never like slow and like fillery in a way that you're like, oh, TikTok, you know, like, can we get a move on? Like, it was still really compelling television, which is why, even though I think that we could have paced it a little, we could have sped things on a little bit and gotten through a little bit more of history, like, it was still extremely enjoyable. I did not feel bored. I think they did a very good job with the pacing of each episode and the pacing of the season in general. And the softening aside, I think Rhaenyra and Alicent continued to be extremely compelling characters. The added complexity from how they've been characterized in the show, all the added nuances to each of their characters, their situations, their relationship with each other and with other people around them, I think is really excellently well done. And the actors playing both characters, they are a joy to watch individually and together. Again, despite the contrivance, seeing them in two scenes together, it's just such a delight seeing them perform together that, like, I kind of don't care what we had to do to get to that point. I'm glad we had those scenes. The dragons, always, as I already mentioned, the way they are portrayed, the way that, like, the reality, the realness of them, the gravity of them is conveyed, I think always they knock it out of the park. They know exactly when and how often to employ them. 10 out of 10. And to that point, showing the gravity of the situation in general in Westeros, not just the dragons, but really kind of like making it real to the viewer just how dire the situation is on so many levels. You know, the starvation, the need, the chaos of it, that there's nowhere to run. Just, it's a really like tense and bloody and awful time. And I think the show does a really good job of conveying that. Again, there's like no good place to be, no good person to be in Westeros at this time. And I think they did a good balance of screen time for the different perspectives, the different characters. I never felt like we were lingering too much or too little on any of the characters. I feel like we got a good balance, we got a good mix, we covered them all consistently. It was never like, oh, this whole episode is just devoted to this one character. Like, sometimes in shows that feels necessary and justified, most of the time it annoys me. So I'm glad that they each kind of had focal moments, but it was a very ensemble piece, as it always has been, and they're continuing to strike that balance really well. I mean, and as always, the production design is just immaculate. Like, this is how you adapt fantasy. The costumes, the sets, the locations, the music, the makeup and hair, just everything. Chef's kiss, 10 out of 10, no notes. This is how you do it. And then just a few of my favorite things from season 2. Again, despite the contrivance, seeing Emma and Olivia together on screen, I love it. I don't care that it was dumb how they got there. I love seeing those actors performing opposite each other. Yes, I'm so glad that happened. And then despite the fillerness of Daemon's entire arc, seeing Paddy and seeing Millie again was also fantastic, especially Paddy. I mean, he was so amazing as Viserys. So just seeing him for a little bit again was, again, did it really move the plot forward? I didn't really like what we were doing with Daemon's character, but just in isolation, those scenes, they were really amazing scenes, and I did enjoy being able to see them. Again, the dragons in battle, excellently well done. The way that they don't overdo it, they don't overuse it, they do it just enough to convey the utter horror of it, the gravity of it, and then it is just, you know, a spectacle to behold. So well done. And then Alicent talking with her brother. That's not like a big bombastic, you know, like thumbnail type scene, but I really, really enjoyed that scene. Because it was seeing a different perspective on Alicent, seeing this kind of like what if, like what our lives would have been if we had done things differently, been somewhere else, chosen something else, and then kind of seeing, we don't really see that much of Alicent's brother, but in that conversation we kind of get this sort of glimpse of like what Alicent and the royal family and what King's Landing looks like from the outside perspective, because we very much follow insider perspectives in the show, not just Alicent, and kind of like hearing him talk about her and talk about his experience and talk about what her son and what his life is like being raised away from King's Landing. It was just such a rich scene in terms of like opening up the perspective of like how the goings on that we are so like in the moment with in this show. Like we are there in King's Landing, we are there in the room where it happens constantly, and to kind of get this bird's eye view of it from a family member and seeing this kind of humanizing moment between brother and sister, like she's not the queen of the realm. Any conversation that she ever has with anyone is always like political and scheming, and even with her father, even with her children, it's never like a human conversation. And with Kristen, there's all this like guilt and trauma. But with her brother, it was like one of the first times in a long time, if ever, that we'd seen Alicent to kind of just be Alicent as a human sister talking to her brother. So I enjoyed that scene so much. Eric and Arik, they were on the show briefly, but memorably. They were the perfect choice to play those characters, and in general, how the show showed what occurs with Eric and Arik was compellingly done. It was so brutal, but as it needed to be, and the perfect way to kind of set the tone for everything that is to come after that. Well done. And then Missaria is someone that I went from dreading seeing on screen in season 1 to someone that I quite enjoyed seeing in season 2. For one, she fixed the accent, so thank goodness for that. But, you know, the way that she grows into this advisor for Rhaenyra was actually like genuinely an arc that was really enjoyable to watch. And yeah, I was surprised. I was annoyed at first because I was annoyed with her from season 1. But the more I saw her in season 2, the more I liked her and the more I looked forward to seeing more of her. And I think it was a really good kind of foil for Rhaenyra. And because she doesn't have Daemon around to talk to, I thought she was a really great kind of addition so that Rhaenyra is not just like standing around thinking to herself alone, staring off into the middle distance, you know, to have someone to bounce ideas off of. And so all these brilliant ideas for what Rhaenyra is going to do, they're not just like, oh, Rhaenyra has had a brilliant idea, you know, Eureka! That like, she's getting this in, she's humble enough to take suggestions from other people, you know, from Jacaerys as well. But yeah, I really liked seeing her kind of get to connect with another woman, a woman from a very different background, a woman who has a history with Daemon. It's just a very interesting dynamic that I grew to really enjoy. And then despite the missteps with Daemon's arc, which I still don't really like, in the finale, seeing Daemon bow to Rhaenyra or kneel before Rhaenyra, and then the entire army kneeling to Rhaenyra, especially after the doubt over his loyalty, it was a very, you know, like, hell yeah kind of moment, and you really don't get much of that in a show that's as morally gray and messy as this is. Like, there are very few kind of clear-cut, like, yeah, our heroes, like, type of, you know, hurrah moments, and that one, because it was pretty earned, like, that feeling, I personally was, like, kind of grinning ear to ear when that happened. I was kind of like, hell yeah. So I enjoyed that. It was a little silly, but I enjoyed it. Which brings me to season 3. Hopefully season 3 is somewhere between season 1 and season 2 in terms of like the amount of story we're going to try to cover. Like, it doesn't need to be as breakneck as season 1, but we can get through things a little bit faster than season 2. I mean, it feels like we've just been like so unwilling to like actually start properly going to war, and like, I don't know, it just feels like you have us like so like on the brink. It's like, oh my god, you really, really have to just go for it now. You cannot possibly wait any longer. They've changed quite a few things from the book, not insignificant things, or at least not insignificant in terms of like characters that they've like swapped around, or characters that they've like given new arcs to or new situations to. So I'm quite curious to see if they pay those off, how they pay those off, like what they're planning to do with that. Again, how much they're going to diverge from the book and how much they're going to play with it in terms of history remembers it this way, but this is really what happened kind of situation. So we'll see what they do with that. And again, I have generally been a defender of the Song of Ice and Fire inclusion, and I still, generally speaking, am. Daemon's plotline does give me pause. I was pretty unwavering in my like, I think this is great, I trust them with it. I trust them a little less with it now, but I am cautiously optimistic and cautiously curious to see what they plan to do with it, if they plan to do anything further with it, or if that's kind of it. Rhaenyra's on board, Daemon's on board, no one else needs to be on board. I mean, if we start giving Jacaerys visions and a bunch of other people visions, and I mean, yeah, we shall see. Hopefully they don't lean on that too much, because I think it's an interesting element. I think it adds complexity and nuance to a lot of what's going on, but we don't need full-on visions. Personally, I don't think. And yeah, I, for one, am ready for war. Let's go. Let me know your thoughts about the finale, about season 2 as a whole, what your hopes or predictions are for season 3, whatever you want to let me know. And yeah, I'll see you for the equally great show, Rings of Power. I suffer so that you don't have to. But anyway, that's that. That's House of the Dragon. That's it. Looking forward to season 3. But let me know your thoughts. Bye!